the Justice Department unsealed charges against Yahya Sinwar and other senior leaders of Hamas for financing and directing a decades-long campaign to murder American citizens and endanger the security of the United States.
Attorney General Merrick Garland announces charges against 6 senior leaders of Hamas for the, quote, terrorist atrocities of October 7th massacre in Israel. The charges filed in federal court on Tuesday include terrorism, murder, conspiracy, and sanctions evasion. Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar is among the 6 charged for financing and orchestrating a decades-long campaign of mass violence and terror.
In its attacks over the past 3 decades, Hamas has murdered or injured thousands of civilians, including dozens of American citizens. In the early morning hours of October 7th of last year, Hamas, led by these defendants, committed its most violent, large-scale terrorist attack to date. During the attack, Hamas terrorists murdered civilians who tried to flee and those who sought refuge in bomb shelters.
Garland said the charges unsealed are just one part of the DOJ's effort to target every aspect of Hamas's operation, and they will not be their last. The FBI is conducting the investigation. If convicted on some or all of these charges, these terror leaders could face a range of sentences from execution to life in prison. And for more on this, I'm joined by Lisa Daftari. She's a foreign affairs analyst and editor-in-chief of the Foreign Desk. I also want our viewers to know that Lisa was also involved behind the scenes with Jared Kushner and the Trump White House in presenting the first peace to prosperity deal to the Palestinians and then what evolved to the Abraham Accords a few months later. Lisa, thank you so much for joining us. Good to see you. Let's start with the timing of the DOJ bringing this announcement, the charges just days after the bodies of 6 hostages, including an American Israeli, Hirsch Goldberg, Poland, were found brutally executed in a terrorist tunnel, basically shot point blank in the head. Why now, almost a year after 1,200 innocent people were massacred?
Well, it seems as though this was something that was unfolding as of February, but was now only revealed at this point. And I think, a lot of people are saying this is a great development that the United States is actually making this symbolic move against Hamas to show them that we mean business. But many others are skeptical of this move to say, why now? Meaning, why did it take almost a year and 40 dead Americans for the United States to now turn around and say, we're putting Hamas on notice? You heard Garland say that this has been decades of crimes against Americans and others. They have blood on their hands. They're a terror organization. They're on the FTO, the American, with the United States' terror list. But why now? Why haven't we seen more decisive action, not only against Hamas, but against the Islamic Republic, the regime inside Iran that funds Hamas?
Right.
And your point, yes, they might be extradited to the United States. They may face up, execution or whatever sentences. But how are we going to get them here? Are we relying on Gaza to get Sinwar to the United States? Are we relying on Qatar, who is still recognized, Stella, by the way, as a non-NATO ally, a major ally of the United States, although you wouldn't think that they were because of all the money and support that they're giving these terrorists? Are they going to hand over Mashal on a silver platter to the United States to face those charges here on U.S. soil? And those are the questions that we face today. Is this anything more than a symbolic act?
You're right. Iran was not mentioned. And let's face it, a lot of people have this on their mind. It's election season.
That's right. Exactly right. And I think right now, it's just the American public deserves more than to wait for this whack-a-mole type foreign policy. Stella, I've said this before, perhaps even on your show, that foreign policy and national security should be seamless, meaning it should be consistent and predictable from administration to administration, Democrat or Republican or independent, across the board. Our friends should know where they stand, our allies like Israel, and our enemies should know where they stand. And when I say enemies, it's anyone who is operating and acting against the interests of the United States, including the Islamic Republic, who received billions of dollars, almost $100 billion from the United States. How did did they receive that? Because we removed sanctions. They were able to sell oil to partners like Venezuela and China because we removed those sanctions. We effectively gave them the money that they then turned around and funded their terror proxies, Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, and others with. So we have to dig deeper and ask for more, regardless of who you're voting for. The American administration, whoever is in the White House, should be operating in the interests of Americans here and abroad. And when we are funding groups and governments and entities that are funding terrorists, we have to think again.
Yeah, and what's interesting is I read the indictment. 3 of the terrorists mentioned in the indictment, they're dead. Ismail Haniyeh, Mohammed al-Masri, also known as Mohammed Deef, and Warmana Isa. Yahya Sinwar, you mentioned he's believed to be in the Gaza Strip. What, is Hamas going to hand him over to the U.S.? Khalid Mashal, based in Qatar. Ali Baraka in Lebanon. I mean...
Right. And it goes to show exactly what, to your point, that in the interim, while they held on to these charges and only revealed them now, they said they had them as of February, but in the interim, Israel had to take action on its own. I mean, what's the look, Stella? What's the look to our enemies? What's the look to these terror organizations who are looking and saying, well, Israel's alone. Israel's isolated, completely isolated. These terror, the leaders of these terror groups can travel to places like China and Russia and Iran, and they can work with places like Turkey and Qatar, who are our frenemies because we think they're our friends, but they're working and aiding and abetting these terrorists. And there are no consequences across the board. There have been no consequences, and even the United States, who is the main ally, the only trusted ally of Israel, it took them almost a year to step up, to take action for their ally Israel. So this leaves our ally Israel, our only democratic ally Israel, in the Middle East alone. And it makes us look very weak and irrelevant on the global stage. One other thing I want to mention here, Stella, just because we're on the topic, something that I go around talking about a lot, and I know Candace Owens also mentioned this, in her criticism of Israel. What many people don't understand is that we, the United States, we help Israel because they reciprocate that help to us. They are a partner in all types of things, including intelligence, in getting jobs, meaning they have companies and startups, and they are our eyes and ears in the ground in the Middle East. And how many times has Israel come to our rescue to help us foil plots where more American citizens would have died abroad? I mean, we can talk about this for an entire
and
hour,
I'm sure we probably we don't even know about a lot of them that we have,
right.
the foiled plots. It's the ones that go wrong that we hear about. But, you brought up a good point earlier you were talking about, but I wanted to mention this. The country of Israel is being torn apart from the inside right now. We're seeing all the massive protests right now, right after the 6 hostages were killed. Channel 12 in Israel reported finding something in the IDF found something in the Gaza tunnels, and basically it's the Hamas tactic, right? It basically we're going to release more videos of the hostages. It's like the psychological war game. Let's blame it on Bibi, say it's Bibi's fault. And this is what's happening because Hamas knows that they're not winning, and what better way to tear up the country from the inside than divide the nation itself, and that's exactly what's happening right now.
Absolutely. And I think this is one of the sadder, for those who understand the intricacies of politics in the Middle East, particularly Israel, the fact that there are people on the street protesting, it just shows you that Israel is a vibrant democracy, and it does have a left and a right and a center that you do not see in its neighboring countries, where one person, if they dare to protest against Hamas, they would lose their lives. And we know that there are many people who would like to protest against Hamas, but they have not been, they don't have the comfort of doing that. So what we're seeing on the streets is exactly what you said. It is Hamas and Hezbollah, Iran's regime, exploiting what they that democracy and that the politics inside Israel. But I say this in every audience that I address on this, and I'll say it here as well. What goes on inside Israel, left and right, is none of our business. This is what they will deal with in the aftermath of this war. But right now, the entire world has to understand this is a black and white issue. Either you're with the terrorists or you're going to stand firmly against them, because if they're not coming for you today, they eventually will come for you. And you can ask the Europeans that question, and I hope I'm very wrong. But until there is another 9/11 type attack here on U.S. soil, which we are ripe for the occasion, again, I hope I am very wrong. I think Americans will have a very, very upsetting wake-up call, because a lot of Americans are very, very unaware of this threat. The ones that are marching on the college campuses,
Yeah.
especially the ones who are tuning into the mainstream media that is not covering this the way that you are, Stella, and I applaud you for that. I really
Thank
encourage
you.
all of you to be educated on this topic.
No, you're absolutely right, because the mainstream media continues to call these protests pro-Palestinian, pro-Palestine. They have not been pro-Palestinian, pro-Palestine for a very long time. When you see Hamas, Hezbollah flags of Yahya Sinwar being flown in the mainstream media isn't even asking the questions like, what do these flags represent? They continue to call them pro-Palestinian. They're literally jihad propaganda that they're not reporting on. I'd like to ask you this, because you're a Middle East expert. What would a Kamala Harris presidency look like for the Middle East?
Well, very, very interesting question and pivot. Look, we saw what Donald Trump did for the Middle East, and we saw his vision. You also saw, Kamala has been involved in politics for a couple of decades, and you've seen the way that she has voted. She was very much for the Iran nuclear deal. She has played both sides, trying to appease voters, because again, we're in an election, so we really don't know where she stands on, on issues. But we know that she has tried to play both sides in what's going on currently between Israel and the Palestinians. You're going to see a very different presidency under Kamala, who has more of a leftist leaning. She will obviously appease Iran's regime, versus Donald Trump, who will hold them to account. And we saw that under the Trump presidency. There was a pressure campaign that was put on Iran's regime, where these same terror groups that we're talking about right now were going broke, because Iran did not, the Islamic Republic didn't have the funding to fund its terror proxies. Kamala, on the other hand, will probably follow along the same footsteps of President Obama and then President Biden, and what we saw her voting on, which is again leaning towards that Shiite the way of leading the Middle East, which is to put more money and more confidence in the Islamic Republic.
Before we go, I got to ask you this, because Biden recently came out and he said that Bibi Netanyahu isn't doing enough to bring the hostages home. Is Biden doing enough to bring the hostages home? Because, okay, so here's my thing. You're the president of the United States. You have hostages in Israel, American hostages. You also still have people in Iranian prisons. Are you doing enough, or are you just leaving it up to them?
Right. And I think if you ask any American hostage family, they feel as though this administration failed them miserably. It's difficult to really talk about this issue, because we don't have anything else to compare it to. We don't have another administration under the same since October 7th to compare it to. But what we do know is that 40 Americans died on this administration's watch in the hands of Hamas. And we know that this administration, again, empowered and emboldened and enriched the Islamic Republic, which funded those terror organizations to carry out October 7th. And of course, Hezbollah, which is another front that we hopefully will not have to deal with, but it looks like it is imminent to deal with. Look, a lot of people felt that Biden blaming Bibi Netanyahu was a lot of projection, because, again, an American citizen was killed, and not enough attention was given to that. Why haven't we been able to get the hostages back? Why have there been hostage negotiations in other circumstances and not in this one? Why wasn't it on October 8th when the Biden administration turned around and said to Hamas, you give those hostages back or else? And why do we have to hear about these charges being brought again a year later, when we don't even know how many hostages are alive?
Right.
So every attempt to go to a ceasefire, to go to some sort of compromise with a terror organization has failed. Why? Because Hamas has either made incredibly crazy demands, or they have rejected the offer that was on the table. So I think that the Biden administration, and then if Kamala comes into to office has to really, reflect on these policies and how they will affect us in the future. How does this look to our enemies? What's the Islamic Republic thinking about all of this? And Stella, I'll end with this. It's very telling when the Islamic Republic, the regime inside Iran, has favorites. They are putting all of their energy towards getting Kamala Harris elected. Again, foreign policy should be straight across the board. They should not have any favorites. They should think that either way they will be put to the test. They will be held to account for their actions. But when you know that they have a favorite in this race, you know that they're going to get appeased, and
Right.
they're going to.
You know why? Because
exactly why.
the Islamic, Donald Trump handled the Islamic regime very differently. I'll just end with this. Civilians from 40 countries were affected on October 7th. Why wouldn't they all just come together, these countries, and put pressure on Hamas and maybe Biden lead the charge? That's, where I'm at with this.
Right. We haven't seen that type of leadership from this administration, and I think that will have consequences down the road. Again, how we look on the global stage, and I think we could have done much better.
Yeah, Lisa Daftari, thank you so much for being here, American journalist and Middle East expert. As always, thank you. Good to see you.
Thank you, Stella.
For all our viewers asking where One America News is heading in the future, we would like to introduce you to OAN Live. OAN Live is the best way to stay up to date on all of the hard-hitting, straight-shooting, national and international headlines. And the best part is, OAN Live is only $4.99 per month. All the credible, honest, unbiased reporting One America News offers at a fraction of the cost of cable. Just go to OANN.com to easily sign up for OAN Live and stay informed.